Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Off the Rails. This week we're talking about what makes a photo special. Specifically, I want to highlight Missy Elizabeth's amazing submission from last week's challenge, Blue. As soon as I really started analyzing this photo and taking a little bit of a closer look, I realized I had to highlight this for an Off the Rails because it just ticks so many boxes. And this is such a learning opportunity to really take a look at this image and see specifically what Missy did. Okay, so first of all, Missy was nice enough to share with me her before picture, which isn't that crazy of a difference. We can see that certain things, even in the before, tick off the boxes, and then the things that she did in post-processing really brings it home. So the three things I want to highlight, and these are really the three things that you always want to highlight in a photo, are sharpness, color, and exposure, right? These are three things, and I go into detail about these types of topics in my course. But essentially, you want your main subject to stand out, and you want to do that in a variety of ways. This covers a whole bunch of chapters, actually, in my course, but that is really why I wanted to pull this out, because this ticks off so many of them. One is you want your main subject to stand out because you want your subject to be brighter than any other part of the frame or the brightest part of the image. This one, I think it is brighter in the foreground. It's not like a crazy extreme example. Two is you want your subject to be differentiated, to be, pop out of the background by color complement, right? By color contrast. So the colors should be a little bit different from your subject and the rest of the scene. And what I'm calling lack of clutter or clearing the clutter, that's a very deep concept in and of itself. But essentially what Missy did, again, in the before picture, just in terms of shooting, is she shot with a relatively shallow aperture, actually 2.8 on a 200mm, which will blur out the background completely. So we have our foreground, we have our main subject popping out of the background because it is the sharpest part of the frame, it is the brightest part of the frame, and it is, let's just say, the most colorful part of the frame. Now, that's not exactly like an extreme example of all three, but given what Missy has to work with in the entire frame, what I want to point out is that she took care for all of these things, especially color, which we're going to do a little bit of a deeper dive right now. So the first thing we see from the before and after is clearly the color difference. In fact, there's not really that much more difference. There's a slight crop, there's some slight sharpening and a little bit of brightness. But what really is happening is these leaves in the background. Missy completely changed the color palette to an orange tone. Why did she choose orange tone? Many of you already know. That is to complement, which is a literal complement of the color blue. So the blue will pop even more against an orange background as opposed to a green background. But why, I ask, did she desaturate the jacket? Let's take ahead and go to the before here, and we'll go to our color mixer and choose this guy and do some magic. Boom, done. This I covered in a previous Off the Rails episode of that amazing tool. So now we have pretty similar before, after. Maybe she even did that because the tone actually matches so well, but we can see clearer that Missy went ahead and actually desaturated the blue jacket. Why did Missy make the jacket less blue? I mean, clearly her intent was to complement the orange and blue. The challenge of the week was blue. The subject is wearing a blue mask. Why wouldn't she want to enhance the jacket even more so? And she went ahead and did the opposite. So I think this is such a brilliant educational lesson for us to take away from, and that is to simplify. And I want to show you a bunch more examples of ways to simplify. But when I say simplify, I mean simplify for the viewer. What do you want the viewer to look at, right? If we went, well, I can't really do this quickly, but if we went ahead and saturated this jacket, I have a feeling the viewer would be a little bit distracted. First of all, the blues are different. They're just not the same blues. This is more of like a teal turquoise, and this is more of a darker classic blue, and to try and start to color match them would be complicated. Also, do we want the viewer to even be looking at the jacket? Maybe that's too much. I mean, here, it is very clear what we're looking at. We're looking at this weird, bizarre mask that I think it's her daughter is wearing. And it's just so sharp. It pops out of the rest of the scene. It is the sharpest, brightest, and most colorful aspect of the image. Sharpest, brightest, and most colorful. Sharpest, brightest, and most colorful. Those are the three things. What were the three that I said before? This is all about leading the viewer to the main subject with the least amount of distraction as possible. So, great. Let's take a step back and look at some other examples, and maybe we can kind of bring it home. First of all, I want to bring up a photo from Laurent here from week number 9. I think this is a good example. In general, when you have a lot going on in the scene, like street photography, everything starts to blend one into another. This main subject is the sharpest part of the image. There is no color, so we're not going to talk about that. But is he the brightest part of the image? Not really. Actually, the brightest part of the images are right here towards the bottom, and maybe some other spots of highlights around. And you don't realize this, but on a subconscious level, the viewer wants to look at the brightest part of the image. That is the first thing the human eye is drawn to, even as a baby, which is interesting to note. So what we could do here, at least in post-processing, is we could go, and I'm not going to necessarily pop him out and try and make him brighter, but I'm just going to lower the highlights and exposure on a brush and paint around this dude. And then just subtly so, where everything else is a little bit darker and suddenly he pops up, right? What if we went back to this brush and what we just did, it's a super extreme, and this is like on the news or in a documentary, and they're like, they freeze frame the security camera and they're like, have you seen this man? Now, the reason they do that is because the human eye is absolutely looking at the brightest part of the image, right? Right now, there is all distraction cleared. I'm not saying this is how you process it. I'm saying this is the psychology behind it, right? This is the extreme example of what I'm talking about, where you don't want to give the viewer the chance to be confused. You want to make it as obvious as possible. And if we brightened it over here to kind of match the tones of his shirt and face, it's suddenly a little bit more confusing. Like we're looking at other places, not necessarily a bad thing, but to minimize the clutter and draw the viewer's eye in a very clear and obvious way to the main subject, your photo will be more attractive on some kind of scientific level, right? There's many ways to skin a cat. Is that the phrase? That's a horrible phrase. And I'm not really saying right or wrong here. I'm just saying that when you have a photo where the brightest part of the image is the main subject and the rest of the image is cleared of distraction either by blur or by having a different color or by having the rest of the image a little bit darker, the photo will appear more pleasing, at least in a quicker fashion to the viewer's eye when looking at it. So here are just some examples that I pulled out where I felt the photographer had a very intentional use of color palette. Okay, when I say clear the distraction, right, to simplify, I also mean simplifying the color palette. I could just pop up a few here. We see some very specific colors going on. There's not like a whole lot of color going on. And perhaps this is a good example of if there is a lot of color going on, you could just make it black and white. That will tick off that box automatically. Now, there's other things to consider once you're processing in black and white, but we'll leave that off for the side for now. Here's another one of Mises, and this is a great example of having the subject brighter than the rest of the image. Here is intention of color, right? Color palette. Look at this beautiful. It's simplified. There's blue and there's orange. There's not too many other things going on here. There's not like something purple popping out or yellow. It's just there's more, but there's basically two colors that the human eye is seeing. And that is what simplifies the photograph, and that's what makes a good photograph. That's what makes a photo pop out. Again, you don't have to do it this way. I'm just saying these are good guidelines in general, as a general rule of what makes a photo special. It is this attention to simplifying color, exposure, and clarity. And when I say clarity, I don't mean that your photo should be sharp. I mean, you can pop out your main subject by blurring out the rest of it, like we see beautifully here. Also, this ticks off 2 boxes where we have our main subject, which is hands. This is for Hands Week, being the brightest part of the frame. Okay, intentional color, brightest part of the image, intentional color, brightest part of the image, main subject. This is both brightest part of the image and intentional color and blurred background. This ticks all 3 also. Now, you know, these types of photos are a little bit simpler maybe. Maybe there's sometimes less story involved. Maybe it's just less intricate. Maybe for some of you it's less interesting to look at. What I'm saying is, as a general rule, these, you know, when you tick off these boxes, these guidelines make better quality photographs. They make photographs that are easier for the user to take in. 2 colors, right? Not sure why I chose that one. This is also a good example of, you know, blurring the background, brightest part of the image here, and the color pop. I would not be surprised if this photographer actually desaturated slightly the background. Separate it even more, make it even more obvious, you know? Intentional color. So these, I think, are really beautiful examples. These were all, I think, top 3 contenders from this year. And, you know, Misi's photo just really took me there, just really reminded me of these rules and how important they are. And her decision to desaturate the jacket, that was the impetus for this whole recording. Is that, you know, looking at this now we know why the viewer is looking right at this mask, why the mask is just popping out. It's because it's bright. Now, not the most extreme example of being brighter than the rest of the frame, but it is still bright. It is clarity, right? Meaning the whole background is blurred and it is popping with color. And that's just what makes this a really special image. So I hope you enjoyed that. I wanted to really, you know, break that down, but also kind of give an overall general guideline of these rules and principles that I go very deeply in my course. Again, I don't say that to pitch the course. I'm saying, like, even if you don't have a course, like, this is it. Like, that's the short of it, is you want to simplify, right? You really want to try and simplify. Now, my eye is drawn to this one again. Here, Ryan's amazing shot, because there is a lot of clutter going on here. It wasn't maybe so easy for him to work with this, with all these trees and the clouds, but he utilized exposure with this bright light and making everything dark to simplify the image, to simplify for the viewer, so that the viewer is very clearly looking at the main subject, and then everything else is secondary. Everything else the viewer can look at, you know, a moment or 2 later, and that is what makes a special photo stand out. All right, I hope you guys enjoyed this one. That'll be it for this week. I'll see y'all next week. Happy shooting.